Okay, so let's get right into it. We hear all the time about tense standoffs between countries, right? But what happens when things actually get physical? When does a dangerous incident cross that invisible line and become something much, much bigger? An act of war. So, I want you to picture this. It's August 11th, 2025, and we're in the super contested waters of the South China Sea. What started out as just another routine mission is about to explode into a high-stakes international drama. And this is where things get wild. It all starts with a small Philippine ship on a simple aid mission, but in just a few hours, it completely spirals. Two way bigger Chinese ships, a Coast Guard cutter and a Navy destroyer, start chasing it down at high speed. Then they blast the Philippine ship with water cannons. But, get this, moments later, in all that chaos, the Chinese Coast Guard ship makes a huge mistake and slams right into its own Navy's massive destroyer. So, after the crash, the whole world is watching, and the stories being told could not be more different. The Philippines, understandably, expresses serious concern, but China, their official statement just conveniently leaves out the part where their own two ships crashed into each other. And that glaring omission, that deliberate bit of ambiguity, well, that leads us right to the central question. And this is the million-dollar question, right? Was this an act of war? Because there's a mutual defense treaty between the Philippines and the United States. So the answer to this question has absolutely massive implications. To figure it out, we're going to need a kind of legal toolkit.
Yeah, see, international conflict isn't defined by what you read in the headlines. It's defined by some very specific and, let's be honest, often confusing legal language. So let's break down the key ideas we need to know.
Okay, first up, the term act of war. Now here's what a lot of people get wrong. Under U.S. law, this isn't the thing that starts a war. It's an action that happens during a war that's already going on, whether it was officially declared or not. It's a key distinction. Now, on the world stage, international law uses a much broader term, an act of aggression. This is all about one country using armed force against another in a way that violates its fundamental rights. Think of an invasion or a bombing or a naval blockade. This can be the event that actually starts the fight.
And this slide really hits the nail on the head when it comes to a common misunderstanding. An act of war is the physical thing, the shooting, the fighting. A declaration of war is just the paperwork, a formal announcement. And honestly, in the modern world, those formal declarations, they almost never happen anymore. Countries go to war all the time without ever officially declaring it.
So, how do these old-school legal terms apply to today's conflicts? Well, that's where this crucial idea comes in, the gray zone. It's a space where confrontations are deliberately and strategically designed to be ambiguous. And this quote sums it up perfectly. The gray zone is this murky space where countries can be aggressive, they can be provocative, but they do it in a way that makes a full-blown military response really difficult both legally and politically.
So instead of firing a missile, you see tactics like these. Using high-pressure water cannons, just like we saw in our incident, causes damage and shows dominance, but you can try to dismiss it as just a law enforcement action. Or you might deploy a maritime militia, a bunch of boats that look like fishing vessels but are there to harass other ships, giving you some deniability. It's all about pushing the envelope, asserting power in ways that fall just short of that legal line for an armed attack.
All right, so now that we've got our legal toolkit and we understand this whole gray zone concept, let's circle back to the Scarborough Shoal and actually apply all this to what happened.
And this is the big one, right? Because remember, triggering a self-defense pact like the one between the U.S. and the Philippines, that's a huge deal. Not every violent act qualifies, so let's actually walk through the analysis.
Okay, let's break this down step by step. First, was there a use of armed force? Yes, absolutely. Those water cannons count. But step 2, was there an armed attack on the Philippines? Well, no. The actual crash, the kinetic impact, was between the two Chinese ships. It was self-inflicted. So for step 3, international law requires an armed attack to have a certain level of gravity and scale. And this bizarre, frankly embarrassing accident just doesn't meet that high bar.
So when you put it all together, the verdict is pretty clear. This was an incredibly dangerous gray zone incident, but it wasn't a clear-cut act of war. And that's the whole point, right? It perfectly shows the strategic ambiguity of this kind of conflict. It pushes all the boundaries without definitively crossing that legal line.
But of course, the story doesn't just end there. The incident kicked off a strategic response, and it really shines a light on a much larger trend in how global conflict works today.
The United States didn't fire back. Instead, it responded with presence. It sent one of its own destroyers on what's called a freedom of navigation operation through those exact same waters. It was a clear, quiet signal to China that its aggressive behavior was being watched, and it reinforced international law without escalating things into a shooting war.
And this is really why this all matters so much. We might be moving into a new era, one that isn't defined by clear wars with a beginning and an end, but by this constant, simmering state of hostility, endless, tense confrontations that stay just below the legal boiling point.
Which leaves us with a really tough, provocative question to think about. If wars aren't declared anymore, and if aggressive acts are specifically designed to not be acts of war, are the old rules of conflict even enough to keep the peace in a world where the very definition of war is becoming this blurred?